Okay, so some stories, they just keep coming back, right? They just won't go away.
Hmm.
And the Central Park 5 case, it's one of those stories, a horrible crime, a city that wants justice, and you have these five young men just caught in the middle of it all.
Yeah,
But what's so crazy is how even after they were fully exonerated, some people still won't accept the truth.
it's really something.
And that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. We're going to look at this defamation lawsuit that the exonerated five have brought against Donald Trump and a recent federal court decision that's finally letting this case move forward.
It's a huge step forward.
So I think it's helpful to start with a quick recap. So the exonerated five, that's the name they go by now, and rightfully so, but they were known as the Central Park Five. Back in the day, they were just teenagers. Five Black and Latino teenagers who were wrongly convicted in 1990 for the attack on Patricia May in Central Park in 1989. And it was just a terrible crime that really shook the city, and it's just impossible to ignore the racial bias that was so prevalent back then.
It was a very tense time. There was a lot of public outcry. Everyone wanted someone to be held accountable, and these young men very quickly became the focus.
Yeah, and after really intense interrogations, four of them ended up confessing, but those confessions, they've been recognized as coerced.
Right?
And the fifth one, Yusuf Salam, he always maintained his innocence right from the start.
Yes, he did.
And despite the fact that they pleaded not guilty at their trial, all five of them were convicted.
Tragic.
Can you even imagine? Years of their lives just gone for a crime they didn't commit.
It's hard to fathom.
But then finally, the undeniable truth came out in 2002. Matias Reyes, who was already in prison for being a serial rapist and murderer, he confessed to attacking Patricia May, and his DNA matched the evidence from the scene.
It was a game changer.
It was definitive proof their convictions were overturned and the charges were dismissed. And then to really solidify things, the city of New York ended up settling a huge civil rights lawsuit with the exonerated five. And this wasn't just a small settlement. This was a major acknowledgement of the huge injustice they had suffered.
It really was.
You would think that would be the end of it, a definitive closing to this awful chapter.
Yeah, and you'd hope so.
But this is where Donald Trump's involvement becomes so persistent and honestly so confusing, and it really sets the stage for this current defamation suit, even way back in 1989, before these teenagers even went to trial. Trump, he took out this full-page newspaper ad. He didn't specifically name them, but it was pretty obvious who he was talking about. And what he was calling for was just chilling. He wanted the death penalty brought back, and he's basically demanding that they be punished quickly and severely. And this was all before any real investigation had even finished, let alone a trial or a verdict.
That ad really shows you Trump's mindset right from the beginning. It wasn't about due process. It was about declaring them guilty in the public eye based on very little actual evidence.
And despite the fact that they were completely exonerated in 2002 with DNA evidence, Trump has just refused to publicly admit that they're innocent. He just won't do it. It defies all logic.
It's baffling.
And that brings us to the specific comments that actually started this whole defamation lawsuit.
Yeah.
Things that Trump said during a presidential debate with Kamala Harris just last year. Kamala Harris brought up that ad from 1989. And Trump's response, well, let's just say it was full of inaccuracies, he said, and I'm quoting directly here. They said they pled guilty. And I said, well, if they plead guilty, they badly hurt a person, killed a person ultimately. And if they plead guilty, then they pled were not guilty.
Wow.
So there's a lot to unpack there because it's a whole mess of misinformation. I think it's important to understand the difference between a plea, what someone says when they're officially charged, and a conviction, the outcome of a trial.
Right.
The exonerated five, they pleaded not guilty, but they were wrongfully convicted.
It's a crucial distinction.
And in that quote from Trump, what really stands out are the false claims that he keeps repeating. He says that the exonerated five pled guilty and that they killed a person.
Both untrue.
Neither of those things are true at all, according to the official legal records. They pleaded not guilty and always said they were innocent, and Patricia May, while she was terribly attacked and seriously hurt, she did survive.
That's right.
So it makes sense that the exonerated five decided to file this defamation lawsuit against Trump based on these statements that are demonstrably false and other things he said over the years.
It's understandable.
And as you might expect, Trump's lawyers, they tried to get the case dismissed. They argued that his comments were protected or that they weren't actually defamatory. But this is where the recent ruling by federal judge Wendy Beetlestone comes in, and it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Judge Beetlestone, she denied Trump's motion to dismiss the main claims of defamation and false light in her ruling. She very clearly stated, and I'm quoting her directly here, "It can be plausibly inferred that Trump had sufficient knowledge of plaintiffs' wrongful conviction and exoneration to have understood that plaintiffs did not plead guilty. Nobody died as a result of the crimes that day in Central Park, and plaintiffs are indeed not guilty."
Wow.
That's pretty clear, right? The judge is basically saying that there's enough evidence to suggest that Trump knew the truth, that they didn't plead guilty, and that nobody died when he made those statements, and that's a key reason why this case is moving forward.
Yeah, the judge is saying, look, it's plausible that he knew the facts and still said these things.
Right. And she specifically addressed three key things that Trump said that the plaintiffs argued were false and defamatory, and she agreed with them.
Interesting.
First, that they pleaded guilty, which is false. Second, that they badly hurt someone, and while it's true that Mrs. May was seriously injured, Trump used that phrase along with the false guilty plea to make it seem like they were still guilty even after being exonerated.
So very misleading.
And third, that they killed someone, which is a complete lie. So the court is saying that these statements could definitely be seen as defamatory. And just to be clear, defamation, for those who aren't super familiar with legal terms, basically means saying things that are false and that harm someone's reputation.
Right. It's about damaging their standing in the community.
And false light refers to presenting someone in a misleading way that's offensive or harmful.
Yeah, painting a false picture of them.
But there's one part of the lawsuit that didn't make it past this ruling, the claim of intentional infliction of emotional distress.
Right, that one got dismissed.
But the judge said that she was dismissing it because of a technical deficiency in how it was presented legally, and importantly, she's giving the plaintiffs the chance to fix that and refile it. So while that one part is closed for now, the main part of the lawsuit, the defamation and false light claims, those are definitely still active and moving towards a trial.
Yeah, that's the heart of the case.
Which brings up a question that I think a lot of people might have. Can a former president or even a current president be forced to go to court for a civil lawsuit like this? Doesn't presidential immunity protect them?
That's a really important question.
Right.
And there is a concept of presidential immunity, especially when it comes to criminal charges while they're in office.
Yeah.
But it usually doesn't apply to civil lawsuits for things that happened before they became president.
I see.
The Supreme Court actually dealt with this exact issue back in 1997 in the Jones v. Clinton case.
Oh, yeah, the Paula Jones case. I remember that one.
Right. In that case, the Supreme Court said that a sitting president could be sued and made to go to trial for things they did before taking office. Their reasoning was that defending yourself in a civil lawsuit like this wouldn't be such a burden that it would stop the president from doing their job.
So there's a precedent for this.
Exactly.
So basically, the argument that Trump is somehow above this because he was president or because of all the demands of his current political stuff, that doesn't really hold water in court.
It doesn't. And to be even more clear, he doesn't even have to show up at the trial in person. He can have his lawyers represent him. So Judge Beetlestone's ruling really opens the door for this case to go to trial, where the exonerated five will have the opportunity to argue that Trump defamed them with his repeated false statements.
So what are the key takeaways here? What does all this mean for the exonerated five and for this whole idea of holding people accountable?
Well, the most immediate thing is that Donald Trump could be held responsible in a civil court for what he said about the exonerated five. If the case goes to trial and the jury decides in their favor, Trump could have to pay a lot of money.
Wow.
But even more importantly, this gives these men who have already been through so much injustice a chance to seek some kind of justice for the harm that's been caused by these lies about them.
Right.
How damaging misinformation can be, especially when it's spread by someone with a huge platform like Trump, even after decades of proof that they're innocent. These false narratives just keep going.
It's crazy how that happens.
Yeah, this case isn't just about legal stuff or money. It's about a basic principle of accountability. Can someone with a lot of influence just keep spreading lies that hurt other people without facing any consequences? That's the question.
And this ruling gives the exonerated five a chance to pursue that question in court.
It does. And what I think is especially interesting here is how persistent these false narratives are, even when there's overwhelming evidence against them. It shows us how deep-seated certain biases and assumptions can be.
So to sum up everything from our deep dive today, a federal judge has said no to Donald Trump's attempt to get rid of the defamation lawsuit filed by the exonerated five.
Right.
This means the case is going to trial, and the focus will be on Trump's repeated false claims, especially those he made during that presidential debate where he wrongly said that these men had pleaded guilty and killed someone in that Central Park attack back in 1989. We also talked about how presidential immunity doesn't protect him from this civil lawsuit because it's about things he did before he was president.
And what's really striking is how this misinformation just won't go away. Even though there's been decades of clear evidence proving their innocence, and even though the city of New York settled with them and admitted the injustice was done, a powerful person is still spreading a false story. This case really shows how much damage words can do to people who have already been treated unfairly by the system.
Yeah, and it raises the question of what responsibility comes with having a big platform. So on that note, here's a final thought for you. In a world where information spreads so quickly, what happens when people, especially those in positions of power, keep promoting things that are demonstrably false, especially in cases that involve race and social justice?
Yeah, it's a big question.
What does it mean for our understanding of truth and justice when these lies persist even after the truth has been clearly established? That's something to think about long after we finish this deep dive.
It's food for thought.
And that's it for today. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you next time.
See you then.